Hi, everybody. Woo! What great energy we have in this room. Oh, my goodness. I don't know about you, but I've been to a lot of public engagement, open houses, and I don't think I've ever seen a rush line before, so this is pretty amazing. It makes me feel really proud to be part of a city that is this engaged and interested in the future of the waterfront. Like, we really care about this place, and so thank you for being a resident, a passionate member of this community, and somebody who is willing to have your voice heard. And so, this is the first of a lot of conversations. One thing that's really interesting about this event is we're doing the public conversation first. So I think that's quite unique. I think it's great that before any plans have been laid, we're going to have this dialogue. And in my head, I think of dialogue as a series of conversations. So this is the first. There'll be lots more. And a little bit of housekeeping. You're welcome to use your phones. We're going to do that conversation, dialogue, making interactive thing online, in person, and outside. And so you're welcome to keep your phones on, take photos, tweet, be active on our live Facebook. But please turn your ringers off at this time. Thank you. For the upper floors, because of the way the space is divided, I just wanted to let you know that there's comment cards that are in your programs, in everyone's programs. So you can tear off the bottom section of that and use that to share your feedback tonight. We are going to have a live Q&A as well after our fireside chat. And so for the live Q&A, we'll have people coming up at either side of the room. There's a mic on that side and a mic on that side. Thanks, house lights. So I'll let you know when you can line up for the mics and have a conversation. We are looking to keep things very short and pithy. We'd like to hear from as many of you as possible, so please help me with that. And without further ado, I am going to get things started. So I'm really pleased to be joined tonight by Will Fleissig, who is the CEO of Waterfront Toronto. Some of you may know Will. And Dan Doctoroff, who is the CEO of Sidewalk Labs. Before I bring them on stage, though, I would like to do something very important, which is to acknowledge the land on which we're standing. So the land on which we're standing has been the site of human activity for over 15,000 years. It's the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. The territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon, Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Ojibwe and Allied Nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still the home to many Indigenous peoples and from across Turtle Island, and we're really pleased to be able to do this conversation in dialogue with them and to have the opportunity to work here. To kick things off, I'm excited to share with you a video about the vision for Sidewalk Toronto that many of you might have seen in the media release. And this shares some of the values and the questions, the fears, the hopes, and concerns that I think are running through all of our minds of both sides, the people who are working on this project and the residents of the city who have been dreaming along with them. So let's take a look.
I've lived in Toronto for almost 30 years.
I think a lot of people are moving here because of the cultures. You know, there's so many different cultures here in the city.
I always ask someone where they come from, and eventually I ask them, how do you say hello in your language? And I think I've learned maybe 30 hello, goodbye, thank you.
You can meet a new person every week who's come from someplace else and is brand new to the city.
I see a large increase in renting prices, and I think that's partly because of the growth and expansion of the city.
So I think we're at a real inflection point in terms of, which direction the city goes in.
Toronto's in an elite class of cities in North America. San Francisco, New York City, just a handful of others that are so popular, have such great demand, that it also poses incredible challenges of growth.
Waterfront Toronto and Sidewalk Labs are partnering to create a new kind of urban community on the waterfront, one that will be an exemplar to the rest of the world of how to build cities that have the greatest impact on our future.
Addressing the challenges that Toronto has requires a different way of thinking. I like the fact that Sidewalk is bringing a different approach that includes both planning and process and community and technology together, rethinking how we build cities in the 21st century.
Now is the ideal time to start figuring out how do we leverage technology to make cities better. You know, the technologists think, why can't we solve this quickly? Why can't it scale fast? And the urbanist knows things take time and you have to move deliberately. And it's the convergence of those two ways of thinking that can lead to really powerful outcomes.
Sidewalk Labs is using technology as a way of enhancing human interaction, enhancing community, bringing us closer together, supporting the activities of our daily lives in ways that take away a lot of the barriers that separates us.
This initiative will bring together the local tech talent and entrepreneurial clusters that exist within Toronto, giving them opportunity to actually take their new solutions and go to scale and to commercialize in a way that we've never seen before in Canada.
We're excited to work hand in hand with the City of Toronto, the Province of Ontario, and the Government of Canada to build on the region's tech boom and create new economic opportunities.
This will be a global draw for new ideas for economic growth and development. Our technology applied with the energy, the passion of the citizens of Toronto will make this thing incredibly successful.
That is going to be the key difference, to get people to offer their ideas, their concerns, what they love about Toronto, so that this new community can be authentic, can be Torontonian, can be real, can feel like it's really a part of the whole larger fabric of the downtown area.
We're encouraging people to get involved. It's open to everybody, and we want their feedback, we want their input, we want them to help shape this project.
We have an opportunity to fundamentally redefine what urban life can actually be. What we hope Torontonians will see is a place that they can be incredibly proud of.
Toronto has a pulse. Toronto has a vibe to it that many other cities don't have.
This city is becoming quite world-renowned now. And so with that comes that opportunity to lead. So I would love to see us take the reins and become that place that helps people to connect.
Well, they're getting one thing right already. It's Toronto, so that well said. So I had the pleasure of meeting Will and Dan earlier this week and having a little chat with them to prep some questions for our fireside chat portion of the evening, which is coming up. And we were chatting a little bit more backstage, and I wanted to humanize them a bit for you because I know that to have a good conversation, you have to know who you're talking to. So before I read their official bios, which are so impressive, I wanted to give you a little bit of insight into who they are. Dan was mentioning that he grew up in Detroit and knew all the names of all the cars, but has become an obsessive cyclist now. So that was a huge sort of change for him over the years. And Will was actually a concert violinist. So look at that, what you find out when you dig into people's histories. Many of you know Will, who's the CEO of Waterfront Toronto, and brings a deep experience with community engagement and sustainable development, also public and private financing and transit-oriented development expertise. Recently, Will co-authored a national policy paper called Advancing Equitable Transit-Oriented Development. Whew, that's a mouthful. And this proposes pragmatic steps to build out successful transit projects. Will was a partner in Urban Villages Incorporated, which co-developed West Village at the University of California, Davis. It's the largest planned zero net energy community in the United States. And previously, he served in the public sector as the Director of Downtown Planning and Development for Denver, Colorado. It's just my absolute pleasure to welcome Will to the stage.
Great to see you. Thank you.
And Dan. So Dan is here today as the CEO of Sidewalk Labs. But before that, he was the CEO of Bloomberg LP during the most severe financial crisis since the Great Depression. He was also formerly the deputy mayor of economic development and rebuilding for the city of New York, where he led a dramatic economic resurgence for the city after 9/11. Using a 5-borough economic development strategy, this plan included the most ambitious land use transformation in the city's modern history, the largest affordable housing program ever launched by an American city. Dan also oversaw the creation of Plan NYC, which is New York's path-breaking sustainability plan, and 2 years ago, he formed Sidewalk Labs in partnership with Google to address tough urban challenges using new digital innovations. Welcome to the stage, Dan. Okay, now to sit down. You guys have water behind you. So I'm going to start with, I guess, my toughest question, which is in one sentence. And you only got one sentence for this. What is your vision for Sidewalk Toronto?
I would say the opportunity to partner with Sidewalk, the city, and the community to create the most amazing development project in the world right here on the waterfront in Toronto. And to address those challenges that we have about climate change, affordability, and mobility, and even community engagement.
Dan?
Okay, to take truly visionary urban planning, mix it together with cutting-edge technology, and actually begin to bend the curve on virtually every element of quality of life.
Wow, big visions. Okay.
You asked for the big
Yeah, I guess you got to pack a lot into one sentence. So building on that then, what's the most exciting thing about the vision in each of your minds? What really just pumps you up?
I think the idea that it starts tonight, that we're having this discussion, we're listening, and that there is no plan in place, that we can actually co-create by bringing together a lot of different partners and together figure out what should happen on the waterfront.
Great.
Well, look, we are extraordinarily humbled to have this opportunity. Many of my team worked in New York City government and other government. We'll be adding to the team here. And what we learned over our time in government is that it's actually all about listening, reflecting, and creating together. And so I think we have an opportunity working together, as Will said, starting here tonight, to create something that is truly historic. That's what excites me most.
I want to take it to sort of a detailed level for a second. And I was thinking a little bit of an excellent question that you asked in the response to the RFP, Dan. It was, which urban challenges are most urgent for this city? And the reason that question struck me was because Toronto's Chief Resilience Officer, Elliot Capel, and his team are working on a really similar set of challenges. What is most urgent for Toronto right now? So I'd love to get your thoughts, both of your thoughts on that.
Sure, I'm happy to go first. I mean, I think, and I'm curious what everybody else thinks, I think by far the most important issue is all about affordability. We certainly see everyday people, middle-class people, kind of lower middle, lower income people being priced out of areas, suffering from sort of the incapacity to get opportunity because distances are too great or costs are too great. And if we don't fundamentally address that issue, the fabric of society, the whole notion of this being sort of an inclusive community begins to fray. I think we have an opportunity to truly address that issue, that, I think, really lies at the core, more than anything else, of what we have to address.
I would also echo the affordability in addition to just the cost. How do we mix communities that include singles and couples, families, seniors, all ages, income groups? It's a new form of housing that we don't seem to be able to find here in Toronto. I also feel the imperative on climate change. We have all three governments now in agreement to address this, to put Canada at the forefront around the climate imperative, and we need new models. We need to look at new approaches to this, and we need it urgently.
You know, I did want to just add to that, you know, one thing just to point out so everyone understands is that from the very first day that Sidewalk Labs was formed, when I reached an agreement with Larry Page of Google, then Google, now Alphabet, about what were our objectives and what were our assumptions for this project, the first thing that we agreed on was that wherever we do this, however we do it, the community that we create in partnership with the local residents, the local elected officials, had to reflect the diversity of the surrounding metropolitan area on a socioeconomic basis, on other bases as well. That this would not be a tech enclave, that ultimately the way we would judge ourselves is by taking on the hard problems and hopefully coming up with really creative solutions to them. And so that is just fundamental to our whole approach for this project.
I really appreciate that both of you are naming affordable housing and you know, income inequality, because Toronto, the public discourse around that has been significant, and I think will continue to be more significant in the election year. We're facing huge challenges when it comes to affordable housing. So in a one-year engagement, how are you going to approach this in a meaningful way? It's such a big question. How do we do something, and is it enough time?
So the idea is to do a plan, and to do the plan with many, many partners, including industry, concrete, timber, looking with academia, looking at new building technologies, trying to find, not only from a design point of view, but also from a sociological mix, how can we produce the housing, how can we mix it together, how can we create public realm? I mean, it's more than just the building. And I think that what we can do in the plan, and I think this is what Sidewalk is committed to as well, is can we look at best examples, best practices, and actually prototype in Quayside the first start of this new neighborhood and try some new approaches.
I should also point out, I think on the slide that introduced me, it mentioned that, you know, under my leadership and Mike Bloomberg's leadership in New York, we actually created the largest affordable housing program ever done by a city in American history. We created or preserved 165,000 units over a 10-year period of time, which ended up housing over 500,000 people in housing units that they otherwise would not have been able to afford. And we did that pioneering all sorts of new approaches, you know, including, you know, expanding a financing housing agency, working with foundations or philanthropic organizations, pioneering new approaches to tax credits and other things. But the opportunity here goes much beyond that, as Will alluded to. It's also about innovation. You know, we're sitting here at a moment in time when there are new design and fabrication technologies that are only now becoming available that we think can help to meaningfully reduce the cost of housing. And so over the course of the next year, in conversations like this, we're going to be talking about those. And by the way, what we're going to be doing too is prototyping some of those ideas even over the course of the next year.
It's interesting because the trend is becoming one in which corporate, so companies are partnering with local governments more and more. And I think people have questions about that. So I'm wondering a little bit about how this partnership was formed.
So I think just to make sure everybody understands, Waterfront Toronto was formed by the three levels of government: the City of Toronto, the Province of Ontario, and the national government. And the whole idea of creating a special entity was to be the public steward for everyone for the waterfront. And it wasn't just about making money for the governments. It was about creating public realm, about transit, about affordability. And when you go down Queens Quay or go to the West Don Lands and look at Corktown Commons, when you look at what's been done over the last 15 years, it's just extraordinary to see the quality. And we already have 20% of all the housing that's been built in the waterfront that we've been working on is affordable. So we need to do better. We can do more, but we've already started that. And now the question is, how can we build on that, bringing in these new partners like Sidewalk?
So I should probably give you a little bit of the history of Sidewalk. So as I mentioned, we formed it with Google. And we're not a technology company. We're a company that is really built to bridge the divide between the urbanist and the technologist. And that's the way we've built our team. Well, we started with a thought experiment, basically, is if you could create a city or a district or a neighborhood in the internet era, what would it be? And we brought experts together from all over the world in areas like mobility and infrastructure, public realm, buildings, even things like governance and other things. And we developed sort of an idea for what that might be, but just a concept. And then we tested it, and we became convinced that we could actually generate dramatic improvements in quality of life, especially cost of living, but we felt that it was also going to be possible actually to improve the convenience and give relief to time-starved parents, achieve Vision Zero, have the first truly climate-positive community. And so we then decided that what we wanted to do is find the perfect place to partner with the community, with the local elected officials, to try and explore these ideas. And out of the entire world, the single place that we thought was the best was Toronto. And let me tell you why we thought Toronto was the best. One, because of the diversity. Because of the sense of inclusion and openness. And that sense of inclusion also made Torontonians incredibly self-aware that the growth was imperiling that. So we thought it would make people open to trying new things. We also saw just such an incredibly rich history of urbanism, and yet at the same time, sort of a growing tech cluster here. And then what we saw was Waterfront Toronto.
He's been practicing.
I'm still learning.
Right. It's only been 14 days, so I'll give you another week.
I spent a lot of time here as a kid, but I'm a slow learner. But in any event, with the 3 levels of government, with the 15 years of practice developing along the waterfront, and then, of course, there's the opportunity with the land. And so we really saw this as like the perfect confluence of ambition and experience and location and alignment. I got to tell you something, that if Amazon sees what we do, it won't even be a close call.
But unlike Amazon, they responded to our RFP.
Correct.
So let's just be clear, Dan.
And we're not asking for handouts either.
Okay. So I think what was so interesting when I got here almost 2 years ago, and I talked to so many people about the challenges that we've already started to talk about, and the issue of how could we begin to do more and actually push the envelope more quickly. And so the idea of doing the same old kind of RFP where we would do some plans and then have developers and architects respond and say how much they'd pay for the land. I went to the board and I said, maybe this is an opportunity with this property. It's so well located, so close between the Portlands and downtown, that we could try something different. Let's bring the private sector, the community, other partners, nonprofits in early to actually figure out the plan, the mix, the type of architecture, the kind of technology. And so the board said, give it a run. And we talked to a whole bunch of people before we issued the RFP to say, would you participate in a different way? And across the board, we were surprised that they said, that makes sense because nobody has yet figured this out. So we needed a different approach. We put out that RFP. We got quite a number of responses. We went through a process for 3-4 months, and finally, after that rigorous review, Sidewalk Labs was selected as the preferred proponent, and then we went into the negotiations that has led to the board selecting them as our partner.
And then right away, we got everybody here in this room.
Right. I mean, 14 days later. Right, yep.
I really appreciate that the conversation has been so focused on principles of good urbanism. And I hear you say it, and I think that is something that a lot of people walk into the room with. But I was reading Spacing earlier today. That's a local magazine, Spacing Toronto. And a review of, Dan, your book came up, and there was a good question posed in there, which is like, do urbanists and technologists speak different languages? Do they speak differently? And if so, how are your teams going to work together?
Look, I think that is a great question. You know, we think really when you think about the future of cities and think about technology and the relationship with true urbanism, overcoming the urbanist-technologist divide is the single hardest thing that we have to do. And we've built a company with that in mind. It starts maybe with me, you know, having been the deputy mayor of New York, which in New York, by the way, is an appointed position, and then having gone on to run the largest technology company in New York, Bloomberg LP. But if you look at our team, it's an amazing group of people who I hope all of you met out in the lobby earlier and will get to know over the course of the next year and hopefully beyond. It's people like Josh Seirefman, who worked with me in City Hall, who did many of our biggest initiatives, including working on the High Line, or he's the one who helped Cornell win the competition to actually build an applied sciences campus on Roosevelt Island in the middle of the East River. Or Rit Agarwal, who developed Plan YC, which was the world's leading sustainability plan, or Shane Adore, who led a whole set of economic development initiatives in Chicago. But then on the other hand, what we have is, as our chief technology officer, a guy by the name of Craig Neville Manning, who was the first Google engineer in New York and built that department up into what it is today with 3,000 engineers in New York City. But Craig is an urbanist at heart. This is a guy who created a New Zealand coffee bar in Lower Manhattan and came to New York. You know, we're not headquartered in Silicon Valley. We're headquartered in New York. Came to New York because he wanted to be part of the urban fabric. That's how we've built our company, and that's really the way to overcome that internally. Externally, it's to do what we think we did in New York City and what I think Waterfront Toronto has done so well, which is to go out into communities, do things like this. Well, I gotta tell you, we never had anything like this before. Go out into communities, listen, reflect, keep coming back, and understand that the process actually of creation is a process of co-creation. That is what we've learned. That's how we overcome it.
So this is one area where Dan and his team have a little bit of catch up with Waterfront to do here. So as many of you know who live on the waterfront, we have the fastest internet available.
How many people live on the waterfront? Just show of hands. Yeah?
All right. We have the fastest internet in all of Canada, and that was provided by a third party. It's available at an affordable basis for families who don't have the internet, but it's 100 times faster than any other internet you can get. And so we've been doing that at Sherburne Common, where what looks like a park is actually a sustainability filter for the water. So this idea of taking technology, great urban design, and creating places for people to come together and absolutely raising the quality of life, that's what we're all about.
Yeah, I mean, there's tech that supports the sort of placemaking piece and tech that supports the environmental and sustainability piece. But it's just so interesting to consider, other than being a technologist and an urbanist together, which both of you are, also how those pieces fit together. I want to talk about some tough questions that have come up in public discourse a little bit. Obviously, technology is a big part of the vision, and we've just talked a little bit about that, but how are we going to tackle and think about privacy?
Do you want to take it first?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. Look, I think that this is one of the fundamental questions that we are going to have to address together. We do think the use of data can be an important aspect, improving access to services and improving quality of life, but it has to be done in a way that respects people's data, that respects people's privacy. So we actually, literally on the day we announced this, enunciated a set of principles around privacy. The first one is that we believe in what we call privacy by design. Because this will be a new place, we're going to have an opportunity to build privacy into the very foundations of the place and do it, we think, in a uniquely Canadian way. Second thing we believe is you should never collect data for purposes other than improving quality of life. Very important. And third is we are going to develop these privacy policies together, okay? That we will create new ways of looking at it that we think will be unique to this place, that will address finally the issues we all know are out there. I mean, there are cameras everywhere anyway, and there's chaos out there. Together we can bring order, and we'll do it by bringing together community, bringing together experts. Before we even were announced, we've been consulting, for example, with Ann Kavukian, who's one of the leading privacy experts. So this is something that we believe is critical, and that over the course of the next year, we will together develop a set of world-leading standards for privacy in public space.
Right. So this is fundamental, as Dan says, to the overall planning work that we need to address over the next year. And we at Waterfront, as the public stewards and our board and the city and everyone, is absolutely focused that this needs to bring the best minds we have here and to look at how we can create those new standards. So this is something that will be embedded as part of the planning. It'll be part of all the work that we're doing in terms of design or infrastructure or energy analysis. So we want to engage on this. We need to do it differently. And I think we have that opportunity to use the waterfront as a test bed. And if we do it right, then the lessons learned can go out beyond the waterfront to Toronto and perhaps to other Canadian cities.
And in the New York Times recently, there was a piece that was describing the technical dreams of a city. And so now to maybe reverse the conversation we just had, I'm interested in how we take things like robots and sensors and thermal energy grids, self-driving cars, the stuff of those technical dreams, and humanize them.
Well, let me first say, and I think that's a great question. I think it's important to say something very clearly, is we do not believe in technology for technology's sake. It's never about the technology. It is about using technology in smart ways, having it be integrated effectively into truly intelligent, creative urbanism to fundamentally change quality of life. Can we find ways to dramatically lower the cost of living? Can we find ways to dramatically improve the sustainability characteristics of the community? So let me give you an example. You know, one of the things that we've suggested is that we don't have a plan. We've just thrown out a bunch of ideas. And I do hope everyone will read the 198-page response to the RFP. At least flip through it. That we submitted to Waterfront Toronto, that we released when we announced our partnership, because I think it gives you a sense for how we think about stuff. And by the way, I think it's evidence of the fact that we're going to be totally transparent over the course of this next year and hopefully beyond. But if you think about, for example, self-driving cars, and if within a district you had self-driving cars and you combined it with activating bike paths and making a place much more mixed use, and combining it with smart mass transit and other things, and offered that all as a service together so that for one price you could actually get all your mobility needs taken care of. We think that for the average family, they could save $6,000 or so a year.
That's US or Canadian? Right.
That,
right, so
I made
$9,000.
I made the adjustment. That was Canadian.
All right.
But that is a massive amount of money. That is the difference between, for the sort of average middle income family, of being able to take that extra vacation or buy those presents or buy whatever it is or save for university education. We think that is actually possible here. But the purpose of the technology is never to try new cool stuff. We don't care about trying new cool stuff. We care about finding ways to improve people's lives. That's what this is about. And at the end of the day, if we are fortunate enough to go forward with you, that's how you should judge us.
We talked at the beginning about these big challenges that we have in Toronto. And the thing about planning is it takes time and takes consultation and it takes the ability to finally get those adopted. But those can take years and years. They need to be done. But what can we do that's more iterative, we can more quickly look at some solutions. We can test some new ideas. And so I think what we're looking to do is do some of the prototyping, try some things even before perhaps there are new buildings that go up, that we could test some of these ideas. I'm just aghast, as I'm sure most of you are, about the safety right now on the roads in Toronto and people have been hit. And I think we could use some sensors to see if we could try that. And what we've been looking at, and we've discussed this together, that it knows how many pedestrians, how many bicyclists, the transit that's coming, start to change and modify and upgrade so that we get more flow and it's safer. I mean, those are just the tip of the iceberg. So I think we should start prototyping. We should use this to try these ideas, look at Quayside, build that up, look at the new mixed-use paradigm, try to lower energy costs, try to lower our mobility costs. All of this, we think we can do that in that pilot project.
Well, I should point out here, the deal we struck with them, to be perfectly honest, they've taken advantage of us. And that we are prepared to put up $50 million.
U.S.
75. $50 million over the course of the next year in this planning exercise. And you ask, why would we be prepared to do that when at the end of the year, if you don't like it, if they don't like it, if Waterfront Toronto's board doesn't like it, if the elected officials don't like it, they can tell us to go by. Why would we do that? The only reason we would do that is because over these last 2 years, as we've been studying this, we have convinced ourselves that the opportunity, as I said earlier, to bend those quality of life curves is so significant that people are going to be really excited. That's what we're betting on. And so as we work together over the course of the next year, we're going to be kind of trying to let you know sort of together how we are thinking about this. And we're convinced that at the end of the year, you'll find it really compelling.
It's really interesting that you talk about these the sort of stake or the skin in the game that Sidewalk Labs has in this, financially and otherwise. One headline read that Google wants to run cities without being elected. We know it sounds like that's not what's being agreed to here, but I want a little more of an understanding about what is being agreed to.
All right. So this is very important for everyone here and everybody watching to understand. Waterfront Toronto controls the property along with some city property. No land is being transacted here. This is about doing a plan. And as Dan said, this is the idea of co-creating, of developing this with multiple partners. And we have the right to walk away from this if we don't like it. And so it gives us the ability to see, let's see what these guys can do. Let's see if we can actually do this prototyping, see if the results are there. Let's test the data. Let's continue to iterate on that. And at the end of the year, if we have a plan, if we have the financing and the phasing and the sustainability pieces, and we think we can start to actually build physically, and at that point, it has to come back to the board and the shareholders, all three governments, and they can, as Dan said, they can say, we don't think this is good for the citizens. We don't think this is good for the waterfront, and therefore we can go off and go to Plan B.
And by the way, I should also point out, it's not like we're starting from scratch here either. There's been a lot of great planning that has actually been done on the waterfront. You know, the Portland's planning framework, we think, has made incredible strides over the years, and you know, we want to be additive actually to that. You know, many of the concepts that we've already discussed are already included in that framework, and so we're not starting from scratch here either.
Thank you. I have a question about Canadian tech companies. So we have a lot of brain power and skill here locally. How is that going to be integrated into the plan? What are you going to do to engage Canadian tech companies?
To me, one of the great opportunities is to, in effect, engage Canadian tech companies in addition to others. You know, the way we've conceived of this place, so the concept that we've developed is almost as like a district or neighborhood as a platform. You know, our goal is not to do everything. In fact, the reality is, what we hope to do is create the conditions for others to build and create on top of it. And those, first and foremost, we think will be Canadian companies. If you think about, for example, your smartphone, what makes the smartphone magical? The maker of the smartphone, created a nice package. It included hardware and software. There were design guidelines, for example. They even seeded it when it first came out with some applications. But what makes the smartphone truly revolutionary is the millions of people and companies who have actually created on top of it to do things that nobody ever actually imagined were possible. We see this in sort of the same way, and we see the very beginning sort of Canadian companies playing that role in making this place magical. I will also say one of the great opportunities we see here is from an economic development perspective. We think if we create this place, if we do it well, where others feel free because the data is open, because the place itself is open, that this will become a magnet and become the hub for what we think is going to be a new big industry, which is around urban innovation. To have Toronto actually be the global hub of urban innovation, we think is an incredible opportunity here.
One of my best favorite times was when a couple of young guys from U of T grads came into my office, and they were carrying this little box, and I said, open this up, Will. And I opened it up, and there's this really weird-looking light bulb. It's the Nano leaf light bulb. It's the most efficient, least carbon-emitting light bulb in the world. And I started to explain it, and I was looking at it, and I said, so where have you put this in use? And they go, we're not quite there yet. And I said, what if we, at Waterfront, in this test bed idea, were willing to try some new technologies of these Canadian firms and get it in there so people could come look at it, we could test it, and then if people saw it, we could then go to scale and hire more people, not just technology people, but manufacturing people. Part of the mandate of Waterfront Toronto is prosperity, is jobs. We need to look at new ways of doing that, and I think being able to take these Canadian firms and Canadian industry, regardless of whether they're young or new or old, and being able to scale it up into a Portlands where you can start to think about things that you can't do on a smaller project and potentially start to export to the world, we need to think in a bigger scale.
We've already started reaching out to Canadian tech companies. One of the ideas that we mentioned in our response to the RFP is a thermal grid. Well, one of the companies in the world that leads in this is a local company called Enwave. So we've already begun having conversations with companies like Enwave. We think this can be a huge boost to what is, in fact, sort of a growing industry. But this notion of creating here in Toronto a hub around urban innovation, we think is very compelling.
Goes back to your point, I think, about co-creating with others. And on that topic, show of hands, how many people have looked at the RFP? Did you take a look at it?
Wow.
Yeah. We are really interested in this. I'm going to hold you to account. Toronto is so big. I live in North York. I would love if you guys would go on a walk with me there. That's my thing. I like to walk with people. I'm wondering, though, it's got so many textures, faces, experiences. How are we going to capture all of that on a waterfront that has to be for everybody? It's not just for people who are within the 10-block radius. It is for the entire city, and it's my waterfront too. And so, how are we going to make this plan, this proposal, and this planning process meaningful to people who are in Scarborough, in North York, in Etobicoke?
That is so great. I think when we think about the waterfront, it is everyone's resource, and it is for the whole GTHA. And this idea that whether you live or work in the downtown or on the waterfront, what about the person in Brampton, and what about other people who might not come down? Yet when you think about, for a Blue Jays game or Raptors or the Leafs, and all the people that come down in the summer are going to the ferry terminal, 1.3 million people are going down there. I mean, we need to be able to take people and say, it's only 30 meters, just get to that next level. There's so much opportunity for people to engage, not just, to come to meetings like this, but to also online, to look at new forms of engagement using the kind of technology that we've been discussing. I think we need to broaden it. We need to include people who ordinarily aren't at these kinds of meetings or can't make it because they have kids or they have a job. So I think we have an opportunity to innovate on the engagement, to look at some new approaches that have been tried and invent some new ways here so that everybody can include their voice in this.
And maybe some old ways, because walking works really well.
Right.
If it goes back to what I mentioned before, that the commitment that we made right from the very beginning is to have this place ultimately mirror the socioeconomic kind of characteristics of the metropolitan area as a whole, then it's incumbent upon us to try and reach out to people across the entire metropolitan area and create a place that's actually going to be attractive for everyone. And so I think there's a natural, given our objectives, sort of a natural desire to actually reach out much more broadly. I would also say, I think some of the things that we may pilot or prototype in the early years here as we hopefully move toward actually building things, because you don't just start, by building something out of whole cloth. You got to test things out beforehand. Don't have to be, at Quayside. They don't have to be just on the waterfront. Some of the impacts that we can potentially have, things that we can try, can be done in other parts of Toronto as well.
Great. A related question has to do with who is engaged in this process, and I know that we are opening up a public dialogue here, that this will be the first step in a number of conversations. But who is not here, and who would you like to see represented in this room? Whose public good do we mean when we talk about the public good?
So the public good involves an idea of the common ground, of the common place. And I think when I think about the islands, and I think about how for every single person in this room, and however long you've lived here, that the islands is that place where people can come together and feel safe and secure and have fun with your families and with your neighbors. And that feeling of being connected to your waterfront, I mean, that is so powerful. And so if we can take that feeling that people have when I ask them about some story they had about when they first went to the islands. And I've heard some great stories, by the way. I think that is the essence of, for everyone feeling it is their place. And I think if we're able to make that overture and people sense that, we can carry that beyond just when we go for our picnics, you know, in the summertime, that would be the kind of feeling I'd like to create.
And look, it's coming down in some senses to very practical politics. At the end of the day, this is going to have to be approved by the council, the other elected officials at other levels. If we can't convince people that this is for all of Toronto and the metropolitan area, then we're not going to be successful. So we have a real imperative to reach out, to listen broadly across the metropolitan area.
I like that the listening is happening in different kinds of ways, because I do think that public engagement is a barrier, and that we do it in certain ways, and it's our responsibility to make sure that we include the voices of people who don't necessarily feel comfortable in a space like this. And so I think it's also about how the different ways of listening happen.
Well, I think, you know, Waterfront Toronto has been great at this over the course of the last 15 years. In New York, we also got to be really good at these processes of listening and reflecting. You know, over the course of the 12 years of the Bloomberg administration, in 140 separate rezoning actions of major sections of the city, we rezoned 40% of the city. In every one of those cases, we walked the streets, we had charrettes, we had town halls, we had all sorts of different kinds of meetings, we had the capacity to give feedback, you know, online, in other ways. And in every single one of those cases, 140, and by the way, we won 140 out of 142. Our plans got better, meaningfully better, because of that engagement. So at our very core, we believe in that engagement because we are actually humble. We know this is not our city. We're trying really hard to learn as much as we can, as quickly as we can, but you're the experts. Waterfront Toronto, see, I'm learning, is the expert, not us. And the only way that we're going to be able to truly achieve sort of co-creation is by working together.
Well, the offer is still on the table to take a walk with me. I
will take you up on it.
Great. So you've been sharing your hopes and dreams in the lobby today, and I just wanted to move to a final question before we go to Q&A, which is, what's going to happen with this public feedback from the event?
So what we decided to do, which is a little bit different, is by hearing your concerns, the questions, whatever was discussed out front. I'm looking forward to going out there afterwards.
Me too.
I think that we will then take that information, see where the priorities might be, whether it's about privacy or it's about the planning itself or about, you know, certain prototypes or whatever, and start to frame the conversations. And what should it be? What format should they be? What forums? Is it small workshops? Is it more getting expert panels to talk about some of these questions? Is it actually going out and walking together? We got to do the, you know, on bicycles. We went all throughout the Portlands. With ArtSpin, I mean, when you're there in the space and realize how large it is and the opportunities, so maybe we do more bicycling together. There's so many ways that we can listen, that we can understand, that we can share, and I feel that that will be really the critical factor. There's so many good ideas out there. There's so many great designers, but it is in that conversation that we'll be able to, you know, create more forums. So we will get back to you probably within the next 10 days, based on the feedback we've gotten and the discussions tonight, and be able to then say, let's plan, these are the next 2 or 3 meetings around these forums, and start to then open that up and accelerate those.
Wonderful. So dream big and put your ideas out in the lobby. We're going to move to our community Q&A now, as I got to ask all the first questions, which I feel very lucky to have done. To begin, we have some questions that are coming in through the Facebook Live. So we're going to do that. And then at this point, if you are in this lower section here and would like to ask a question in the live Q&A, I invite you to come up to one of the two mics that are on either side. We're going to have time for about 5 or 6 questions, depending on how pithy you can make them and how succinctly we can answer them here. And we're also going to be looking at the live feed. So please comment on Facebook Live, engage us digitally. We're talking about digital and physical things overlapping, so let's do that. So our first question is Elizabeth from North York. Elizabeth says, I love the idea of being able to live closer to work. I cannot afford to do so now. How can you guarantee affordability in the smart city?
So the idea of creating inclusive, affordable housing starts at the design level and looking at, for Elizabeth, what kind of life does she want to have? Does she have a significant other? Is she planning to have kids? Does she live alone? We need to be able to provide different kinds of housing rather than just the same old kind of small unit. And I think that by creating more varied types of housing, we can also improve the level of affordability, as well as all the interesting construction and financing ideas that Dan talked to later. So I think designing affordability into the buildings from the get-go, and if you live closer to downtown, it changes the nature of the streets, the parks, how you get around by walking and biking. So it's more than just the unit itself.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to question 2. This is from Torontoist. What does success look like? How much failure is tolerable or needed? And to what extent do innovations proven at Sidewalk need to roll out to the rest of the city for this to be a success?
So in terms of the metrics of success, I keep coming back to those quality of life metrics. We'll know we're successful when that family actually can save $10,000 a year because the transportation and housing costs have come down. We will know that we actually see improved health, that the safety on the streets is dramatically improved. In fact, as part of the RFP response, we were asked for what do we think are the metrics that are important. There were about 25 of them, and I think those are the ways in which over time we should actually be judged.
Great. The next question is Sylvia from Hillcrest. Sylvia says, my hope is that all the data gathered for this project is open and easily accessible so that academics, journalists, and community members can use it to enhance the public knowledge of our urban home. What data will be shared openly and on what platform?
Fundamentally, we believe that this has to be an open platform. If you believe, as we said, that the real magic will occur when people create on top of it, they have to be given access to the data and the information. And so, we'll work out over the course of next year specifically kind of what that, and the years following, what that means. But as a fundamental principle, the notion of open data is critical to us.
And I also just want to add that who controls the data and the use of the data, whether that's another entity that is not Waterfront or not Sidewalk, but maybe a group that actually is a trust for that data. That's something that I think we should derive what's the right thing for Toronto and for Canada.
Super interesting. The last question here, sorry, second last.
Well, these people are waiting too.
from the online, because I really do want to get to the public Q&A here. Kaya from downtown says, how does Sidewalk Labs plan to work with Torontonians to make sure that their voices are heard in the development of their own city? What experience does Sidewalk have with community development?
So we addressed this a little bit before, Kaya, but you're going to see over the course of the next year in all of the different ways that we've described here, intensive community engagement. That'll take many different forms. And as to your question about what experience do we have, I guess the best thing that I can point you to is the experience that we had in New York City. I mentioned the 140 rezonings. My partner, Rit Agarwal, who led Plan YC, the city sustainability plan, which literally looked at every single aspect of New York's physical environment: land use, open space, brown fields, air quality, water quality, energy, transportation, adding it all up to climate change. We led a community conversation that lasted for months and months that ultimately helped to form that plan. So, you know, you're going to have to trust us to some extent, but you can also go back and look at the record. We're very proud of the way that we always engaged the community. And I will say, by the way, over the course of the 12 years of the Bloomberg administration, we didn't always get it right, and we learned a lot along the way. And that actually raises a question that I think was asked just before, which is, you know, what's the tolerance for failure? I think that is actually a fabulous question. The answer is, you know, Mike Bloomberg, whom I served, when he was mayor, said, show me somebody who has never failed, and I'll show you a failure. You gotta take risks, and sometimes things don't work out. You have to be smart in the way that you mitigate those risks. But if we don't take risks, we'll never do anything great. And I can tell you, I know I speak for Will, I know I speak for my entire team. I hope as we get to know each other, we speak for you. We're in this to do something great, something historic, something that has an impact, yes, on the waterfront, but that extends beyond the waterfront to the rest of Toronto and beyond. But you're going to make some mistakes along the way, for sure. What's important is that you learn from them, try and get better the next time.
Anne from Etobicoke is asking, how does this project create work that is full-time work? Toronto needs innovation and education that leads to job security, so young people can plan to be creative.
The number of jobs that are slated to come to the downtown core with the work that's been done by the city on TO core is just exponential. And also with the immigration that's coming to Canada, and that many people end up coming to the GTHA. So to me, the issue to answer that question is about job formation, job creation. In addition to whatever we know today, there's going to be a whole new set of jobs that are created, hopefully out of what we do here in the waterfront. So we see a direct link to this innovation agenda and the prosperity. And that if we can link the two things and take these great young minds from all the colleges and universities here and across Canada and try some new ideas on the waterfront, see which ones work, start to go to scale, create more jobs, have people living closer to where they work. I mean, it all starts to feed together.
Thank you. We're going to move from the Facebook Live to our live audience now. I'm going to start on this side. If you could state your name before you state your question, and also share with us which part of the city you're from.
Hi there, I'm Zane. I'm from kind of the west part of downtown. So I wrote my question down.
That's excellent.
So you talked a lot about affordability, but I think one of the other most pressing issues in the city, I think a lot of people would agree, would be transportation. And I think it's fair to say that this eastern part of the waterfront to be successful, and this project you're talking about to be successful, needs high quality mass transit. And also you talked about, you know, how can people from all over the city access the waterfront. High quality mass transit is so important to that. Now I know the waterfront reset is happening right now, but you know, there's upcoming elections, provincial elections, municipal elections. I don't think really, realistically, giving transit to quote-unquote latte sipping downtown elites is going to be popular. So why the hell are you, excuse my language, but why the hell are you going ahead with this without LRT or something in place with funding going ahead?
Well, go ahead. First of all, let me say we're not going ahead with anything unless we've actually thought about those things. And that's going to be part of the planning effort that we'll engage in over the course of the next year. So I can't give you a definitive answer. We do agree that mass transit to this place, better access to this place, are absolutely critical for it to be successful. Now, how do we figure out ways to pay for that when they're competing transit and other priorities? We're going to have to, in many cases, be really creative. I'll give you an example, and I hate to use too many examples from New York, but you know, when we came into office, It was January 1st, 2002. It was just 3.5 months after 9/11. The city was in desperate shape financially, and our single highest priority was actually building a subway extension into this desolate area on the west side of Manhattan, which we saw as the place to which New York City could grow. We had no money. The state, which controls the transit system, wasn't going to give us any for that subway extension. So we came up with an incredibly creative idea that at the end of the day has worked beautifully. And that was to go to bondholders, ask them to give us money, and give us money recognizing that they would only be repaid out of the incremental taxes that were going to be generated from new buildings being built into the area in which it was extended. Now that has worked extraordinarily well. Over the next 20 years, it's going to throw off another $20 billion in free cash to the city. I only mention it because there's lots of ways to be creative when you're in a constrained world. And what we're really looking forward to is working with all the stakeholders to see if, as we go through this planning process, we can't come up with great ideas.
Just very quickly, on the transit reset that you mentioned, I'm one of the 3 chairs of the group working with TTC and the city and Waterfront Toronto. And I agree with you that that reset and how do we get from Union Station down to the ferry terminal and then over to the Eastern Waterfront, maybe we need to look at some improvements. We need the LRT, that needs to happen, but how can we improve things in the next 36 or 48 months? It may take years before we get that LRT, but we still need to improve some of the transit service. So it's both a shorter term and a longer term solution that we think some innovation could actually be very helpful here.
Yeah, we also think there may be really interesting technologically based solutions as well.
Thanks so much, Dan.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm going to move over to here. If you want to state your name and where you're from.
Hi, I'm Sydney Eads. I'm from the downtown core region. I'm the moderator for Google Local Guides Toronto. I have almost 1 billion views on my Google Maps contact this year, the third most accurate map in this world. From that, 25% of the views on Google Maps in Toronto are accessibility views. The population in the future will be baby boomers with accessibility issues. Who can Google Local Guides work with at Sidewalk Labs to help map and plan accessibility options?
We are eager to engage with you, very aware of what you're doing, and so you can send an email directly to me. By the way, I'll give everybody my email address. You can write to me directly. It's Dan at Sidewalk Labs. Huh?
They will write to you.
I'm fine with that. That's great. Dan at sidewalklabs.com. And if you hold me here a lot longer, I'll probably give you my phone number too. So seriously, just reach out to me directly.
Directly? Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
I would say that on the Sidewalk Toronto webpage, there is a place that if you have ideas, if you're thinking of partnering, if you want to be part of this platform that Dan mentioned, go ahead to that webpage. That's actually the best place. I mean, getting hold of Dan, that's okay, but I think if you want to really get in there, you got to go. He's just going to send it to someone else, so why not just send it? Sorry, the cat's out of the bag. So I think that having it, if you go there, you really will actually get to the group that's looking at categorizing, putting them together, and then forming some working groups.
How will he do that with his phone number? Thank you so much for your question. Yeah, on this side.
Hi, my name's Karen. I proudly raised my family in central Toronto, and I see this as an enormous opportunity for building the infrastructure, but combined with wearables, sensors to prompt the infrastructure to adapt to your points of quality of life. And I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on to what extent or how you see whether it's wearable technology triggering different services in the community, lighting levels, colors, things like that. I'm wondering what your thoughts on the integration of those different types of sensors and IoT devices for mental health and quality of life.
We think there are real opportunities, but consistent with the question about privacy we talked about earlier, it's going to have to be very carefully done. I'll tell you one thing that's going to absolutely have to be required here, that other than in matters of public safety, people are going to have the ability to remain anonymous. And yet you also want to give people choice as to what they may be able to do. And so we don't know the answers to all those questions, but we do know that having information that's carefully managed can unlock significant opportunities for not just kind of improving health, but participation in the community and in many other things. And that's part of the conversation that we're going to have.
What a great question.
Thank you.
IoT, Internet of Things. Go to the side.
Good evening. My name is Hamoon. I'm an immigrant entrepreneur based in downtown Toronto, and I run a company, a startup called Audacious Futures that's all around the belief that the future is built at the intersection of technology, humanity, and philosophy. So thank you, first of all, to both of you for bringing such an audacious idea to our city here, and thank you for that. My question for you is around, you mentioned, Dan, this idea of platform. And this Sidewalk Labs being a platform, Sidewalk Toronto, the first example of that. And one of the things that's been shown over the last few years with platform ventures is that while they distribute a lot of benefits and services, they concentrate wealth and power quite significantly. So I'm just really curious when there's so many innovations that this venture is going to push on the urban side, on the technology side. Is there an opportunity, do the two of you see an opportunity to also rethink and fundamentally reimagine the power and wealth concentration that happens with platform ventures and platform plays? Is there a way for residents and early adopters in Toronto to be shareholders in one way or another of a venture like this?
Yeah, that is a fabulous question, and we've only... Until we have the model of what we're actually going to do, it's a hard question to answer. But I will tell you that amongst ourselves, we've talked about sort of different models of governance and ownership. I just don't think we know the answers to those at all, but it's a great question. I'll tell you where the vast majority of value will get created, though, is by having this platform actually be open and enabling people with their great ideas and their experiences to build things on top of it, where at the end of the day, they'll be the beneficiaries of sort of their intellectual capital and hard work and not the platform itself.
And I just wanted to add that, that question, it's so easy to go right to the tech side of it, but I look at what's going on in urban agriculture. Look at what's going on in new forms of manufacturing, where these small shops are doing these really cool things, again, using the technology in order to do something that benefits many, many, many people. So if we could get fresher produce to folks who don't have access to it because we do some urban ag here, I think that's the kind of thing we need to be looking at, and some manufacturing as well as the kind of tech app situation. Thank you.
Thanks, Hamoon. I'm going to move over to this side.
Hi, I'm Cameron. I'm from East York. Canada has one of the largest, has the largest sustainable forest in the world. We currently have the tallest mass timber building in the world. Right now, we're seeing a lot of interesting showpieces of mass timber in Toronto, including the new ferry terminal. I was wondering how mass timber fit into your vision for the new quayside development.
I think that the idea of doing that, and obviously the codes need to be looked at, and I know the city started to investigate how can we use some of those new building codes to reflect what we're seeing on the West Coast, in Vancouver, et cetera. So very much so, the composite wood, and I think given our, who we are here in Canada, and being able to take new technology with that resource to provide affordable housing, to lower and become a climate positive. There we're really starting to connect the loop, because it involves the climate, the affordability, the prosperity, keeping people working in terms of the logging. So I love that idea, and I think that's the kind of innovative connection of all those dots, that if we think comprehensively, we can do something pretty amazing.
And you will note when you read every line of that 198-page RFP response that focusing on cross-laminated timber is actually we think a potentially very important idea. And as Will said, city has actually already begun thinking about it, and as we've has significant progress in terms of thinking about the codes for it as well. So we said hope to build on that.
And I think the modular component as well, we should talk about that maybe outside. Yep.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cameron.
Good evening. Welcome to Toronto, the city of many strategies and little money. My question to you, even though I would enjoy Google becoming my technological overlord, is where does the line of Sidewalks participation in the execution of public policy stand? Because currently we have an open data strategy, we have poverty reduction, we have Toronto Strong Neighborhoods, and that's just like the last 3 years. So we have a lot of strategies that need funding and also technological know-how in executing a more innovative process. And I know that you guys don't want to get involved in that murkiness of bureaucracy, but it's essential for us to move forward. So
let me say, first of all, in terms of getting involved in the murkiness of bureaucracy, that's not true. We believe in government. We believe in engaging with government. We are aware that we can't do anything without government, and we are extraordinarily respectful of it. And so our hope will be to work very closely with government to figure out sort of for each of these issues sort of what the right strategy is. You know, at the end of the day, we're not going to be able to do everything. We're all going to have to figure out ways to prioritize. But this isn't going to be some just independent fiefdom that gets run separately. This is a part of Toronto. I mentioned that we talked about sort of the basic assumption underlying this place. And I said one of those basic assumptions was that we wanted it to reflect the socioeconomic diversity of the entire Greater Toronto area. A second key assumption that we've made, and we stated it right from the very beginning, was this place had to be, whatever it turns out to be, an integral part of Toronto and the metropolitan area. And so, we don't see this as an independent entity. We see it as a critical, integrated part of the city itself and the surrounding area. Oh, I think it's too early to talk about any specific thing. Our focus clearly is going to be on the place. So there's opportunity to prototype and try things outside and show benefit for areas outside. But, we will have to see as we get into sort of the comprehensive planning, kind of what the opportunities are and how people feel about them.
Thank you. Thanks. We're going to move over to this side.
Hello, my name is Bria. I'm coming from Seaton Village. Thank you for your enthusiasm. I come with a little bit of skepticism. This is directed towards you, Dan, because you're underscoring your past experience, and I've lived in New York for 6 years. Help us understand how reliable your president is, for in some ways the Bloomberg administration was talented in running a government like a corporation, and some would say it turned New York into a billionaire's playground. And affordable housing is actually showing signs of stagnation and maybe crisis. This is evident in rapidly gentrifying neighborhoods, discriminatory proposals being put forward by developers with affordable housing tenants, designated as separate entities and limited to access to amenities. This August, 61,000 people were homeless, which includes families living in municipal homeless shelters, and is taking nonprofits and community groups to provide services, education, and pushback, such as the Crown Heights Tenants Union, to actually protect homes from becoming unaffordable and circumventing zoning policies from displacing communities. You say you've accomplished the largest network of affordable housing, but I would suggest that given the current situation in New York, your statement to put community first is seriously flawed. I'd love to continue in detail, but for the sake of brevity, which is not very short, the Bloomberg administration does not provide a good example of fair, affordable, and equitable urban development, unfortunately. So please, really, tell us what you've learned from your experience in New York, that when it comes time to decide and implement, that growing economic inequalities do not accelerate with this development.
So, look, I think I think that is a great question. And you mentioned that you're skeptical. And by the way, I hope people are skeptical and pose the difficult questions. I saw online, the Torontonian, had a list of, I think, 70 or so questions that should be posed of us. And I think you should hold us to the standard of answering those questions. Now, with respect to the experience in New York, I'll agree and disagree with what you said. I think we did do a pretty heroic job of building affordable housing. I will also acknowledge, and I do in my book that was just published, that we didn't do enough. Now, I also want to say, though, that when we started our affordable housing program, it was in 2002. The city had no money whatsoever. We committed to spend $3.5 billion to create 75,000 units of affordable housing at a time when people were worried about the city, people fleeing the city, not about the city growing. We doubled down on that to increase the size of the program to $7.5 billion and 165,000 units just 4 years later when we saw that the city was starting to grow. The real problem with affordability actually came after the financial crisis when, because of lack of financing in the private market, there was no pipeline of housing units, and then the economy bounced back really quickly and the city started to grow very rapidly, creating an imbalance. And so I think it's fair to say that at the end of the day, when we look back, we didn't do enough because conditions changed much faster than we thought. And so I think that point is really fair. But I do think the effort was really a historic one. And we have to learn from that and recognize, as here, that we actually have to stay ahead of demand rather than simply trying to time the market. So yes, I'll cop to the mistake at the end of the day, but not from an intent perspective. But thank you for your question.
Thank you.
I also want to say thank you for pre-writing your question and articulating it so beautifully. It's really helpful. We'll go to this side.
I think that we need to have some criticism of innovation and technology.
Can you tell us your name and where you're from?
My name is Michael Rosenberg. We have not really seen anything that has really helped the world from these things, and it's going to get much worse in the future. There's a lot of bad things happening, and I think that the awareness of the problems has to overtake the positive view. That may not have happened yet, but I think it has to happen, and I think that basically we don't need the approach of trying to use technology and innovation. I mean, just on a sort of the level of housing and affordability, like the whole concept of having low-scale development in the Portlands and the waterfront seems to have gone out the window when we're back to tall buildings. But I think we need to have some honesty about this. The reason we have tall buildings is because the economy is not doing well enough to enable people to live in a nice place. So they end up with a tiny box high up above the ground. It's because technology has reduced productivity and the innovation and knowledge agenda hasn't worked that we find ourselves living in worse and worse conditions. And I don't understand how you say it doesn't work. For example, I spend less than $2,000 a year on transportation using a good old-fashioned low-tech system called the TTC. there isn't $6,000 to be saved from my transportation spending. So I'm sure that the technology agenda is going to make transportation more expensive and housing more expensive and the economy produce less and use up more resources. And we'll just end up with technology taking over and everybody being poor.
Michael, can I ask for your question? Oh.
Well, I'd like to know if there's any possibility of having this entire project become low-tech, but I mean, I think we're just going to have to continue a discussion about that, but that's my goal, and if you can say yes to that, it'll solve the problem.
Thank you for your comments, Michael.
Michael, I'm glad you made it tonight, okay?
Look, I think there are always risks with technology, and we always have to be skeptical and ask questions. I think to say that technology is always bad sort of ignores history. I mean, I look back to the end of the 19th century when the electric grid was actually rolled out. It was incredibly controversial at the time. But what did it enable? Okay, it enabled our cities to be 24-hour. It enabled our cities to be vertical. It made it easier to take that TTC that you get around in. And it was controversial. It took time. It took experimentation. But we can't imagine life without it. What's important is that we ask ourselves these hard questions, that we wrestle with them, that we try things, and that we have an open mind. And I think that's what we hope to be able to bring here. So I absolutely respect the skepticism, but I think that the opportunities actually are much greater than the risks.
Thank you. We're at 8:30 now, but we're going to continue to take questions because it seems like there's a lot of energy for that in the room. So go ahead, your name and your neighborhood.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Alejandra Ruiz, and I coming from Greenwood and Danforth, to be very specific.
My neighbor.
Yes.
My old neighbor, Alejandra.
Yes, and I'm representing Acorn. It's an organization who fight for social change, for low income and moderate income. And following with some comment that Will made about Sidewalk Toronto being able to hire a lot of people and create a lot of works. So people who are going to work in the sidewalk will be able to rent a house in a unit in the sidewalk or even purchase?
I think the idea is we know about the demographics. We know about that right now. I think the waiting list is it's like 90,000 or 100,000 families. We're producing barely able to keep up pace. Most of the stuff we all know is condos that's being built that just is not affordable to most people. Let's look at a new approach that is purpose-built rental. Maybe it's one of those tall masswood buildings. Maybe it's modular housing. Maybe we can find a way to do it so that we can look at all these different income scales. That's, for the lower income, the CMHC, which is the Canadian Mortgage Housing Corporation, defines it so that you can't spend more than, 30% of your money. Workforce housing, I mean, people who do live in the downtown or, want to work there, can they afford that, even though if they get a decent salary? And then how do we mix and cross-subsidize some of this? Because there are people who would like to live in the waterfront, who may have the means, and maybe that can help subsidize. So what I'm hearing when I talk to city officials and folks in Ottawa and also in Queen's Park is they want to do something. They're not quite clear what those strategies might be. That's why Waterfront Toronto, in partnership with Sidewalk, with other agencies, with other builders, let us try some new approaches, see what can work, and then if we can do it, let's roll it out. Because we know what we're currently doing is not meeting it. We've got to do something different, and we want to try and do that. And I really appreciate your question. Thank you.
Knows very well what I'm talking about inclusionary zoning, because it has been a success, and I've been following that. And you can do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I know Acorn was out protesting earlier, and I just want you to know how much we respect that and said that the biggest thing we can do is make a commitment ultimately in this place to real diversity. Then we have to find a way to make it work. I have no doubt about that.
Okay.
I just want to say it's amazing that people like Alejandra are here. I've walked with her and looked at our neighborhood when I was in Danforth, and Hamoon Akhtari, who spoke earlier. The people who are asking you questions right now are really some of the most incredible city builders. Let's go to this side.
Great, thank you very much. Welcome to Toronto. Really appreciate this initiative. I think it's going to be amazing for the city. I think everybody's super passionate about it, and that's why we have strong opinions, positive, negative. But overall, I think this is going to lead to something really good.
Can you introduce yourself and your neighborhood?
Definitely. So my name is Boris. I'm a tech employee in Toronto, senior product manager at one of the tech companies here. So my question was a little bit more pragmatic, I guess. I'm interested to know how will you guys decide what to focus on for phase 1 of the development? There's a lot of needs to address. What will dictate priority? How will you make that decision? So that's kind of like my main question, and also a recommendation that I had as well. So we talked a lot about affordable housing. I think one of the ways that we can address that issue is to actually provide affordable education. We want to empower the individual so that they can be a part of the future. Give them the skills and knowledge to be able to succeed in the city, because supply and demand. The more interest there is in the city, it's very hard to fight that price. So I think that can really help as well. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Boris. I think one of the fundamental principles really starts with this idea that if you read the 198 pages, is this idea of radical mixed use, and the idea of the kinds of buildings that we know in King Street West, for example, these warehouse buildings that can be adapted over time. I mean, we've seen them go from warehouses or manufacturing, and then they became, artist lofts, and then they become offices, and then they become something else, condos, who knows. But that adaptability of buildings over time, because there's technologies we don't even know about. And so I think if we can look at some designs that begin to test some of these ideas, some of them may be old ideas, some may be improvements over things we already know, that will allow us to look at this idea of mixing academic uses, tech startup uses, social co-ventures there, different kinds of age housing for people of all ages and income brackets, workforce ideas where we should have some academic anchors like we have George Brown College. I mean, we have this corridor that's coming out that's about innovation. It's about this idea that Dan raises, this cluster of urban innovation. We need people to live there, learn there, work there, recreate, have fun. It's about this idea of mixing people and uses together. And if we can show that in the Quayside, in that first 12 acres, and then start to see how that's working and see what kind of mix starts to make sense and where the demand is, and then we can start to potentially roll that out and go to scale.
I just want to answer your first question, which was how do you prioritize? Because clearly we're not going to be able to do everything. We're all going to have different aspirations and interests and beliefs, and we're going to have to figure out a way to harmonize them. If you were to ask me for a rule of thumb, it would be sort of the biggest quality of life benefit for the buck, right? We're going to have some level unlimited resources. Our goal is to really dramatically improve those quality of life metrics. We're going to have to come up with ways of estimating what initiative achieves what quality of life improvements, and ultimately try and prioritize based on that. And some of that will be part of what the community conversation is about. If people agree, as I do, which I think is my sense given the questions, that affordability is the #1 question, then the initiatives that actually achieve truer affordability will probably be given a greater priority. On the other hand, for example, if people's priorities are convenience or their safety or their opportunity in some other form or environmental performance, then you make other choices. So part of it is deciding, what really is important, and then you evaluate what the trade-offs are in terms of, in effect, investment and return.
And I think that's why the engagement process is so critical, because if we start hearing, not just from you here, but from thousands and thousands of Torontonians about what those priorities might be, that is going to inform how we start to address those mix of uses, and how do we find what are the right priorities. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Boris.
Hello, my name is Fayaz, and I live in the Annex. The vision you shared today sounds like a highly interdisciplinary endeavor. Therefore, what role do you envision for local architects, landscape architects, and urban designers, including those practicing in academia and also newly emerging?
I don't know if you want to. Our assumption is that we're going to heavily engage, often through competitive competitions, for example, for design. Obviously, as we move forward, assuming we do, that there's going to be an incredible amount of work that's going to get done. And I really believe that if we do this, this will be an incredible opportunity for sort of local service professionals. So if we do this, it's going to be a huge project, and that's going to create enormous opportunity. What we really do hope is that it really brings out the creativity of the local community.
Waterfront Toronto has a great track record long before I arrived in terms of competitions, in terms of local, and something I really am intrigued by when I looked at the mission of the Toronto Film Festival, the best of Canada meets the best of the world. I love that idea of trying to mix some thinking that we can learn from other countries and other places, but also let's bring the best of Canada, not just in Toronto, but across the country, to this test bed. So I think that idea of outreach involving all the colleges and universities, doing more competitions, allowing younger architects to have a shot like they do in some cities in Europe where they're trying to get the industry and help people to move forward and partner them with other companies. I think that kind of richness will only provide a richer environment. Thank you very much.
Great question. Thank you. We have time for probably about one more question on each side, and then depending on our pace, maybe an additional.
Hi there, my name is Gary from the Queen West community. I know the next year will be mostly about planning, and there's some mention about like prototype. So my question is, maybe just give us some example, what kind of rapid prototype we can do in the next year in the planning phase. So by the time that we finish planning, when we try to make a decision, we can have more like informative data to make those decisions.
Well, let me give you a couple examples of that. One is that we've been developing through what we call our model lab, a different approach to modeling movement within a city or a metropolitan area. We would hope to engage with the transit and transportation agencies here to begin to think in a far more comprehensive way, in a far more real-time way about transportation problems. A second transportation-related opportunity is, look, we all know, for example, on Queens Quay that there are crowd issues, there are safety issues. The mix of modes creates issues, whether it's bicycles, pedestrians, transit, automobiles, and other vehicles. We've been working on a way to actually sense sort of the different modes and where they are, and potentially then develop interventions that can address some of those conflicts. Give you a third one. We've created a company called CityBlock. CityBlock is pioneering a new approach to healthcare for the hardest to care for patients, people who have multiple problems. In the United States, they typically get care paid for through sort of government programs like Medicare and Medicaid. And we're developing a different approach to caring for them that actually recognizes that an enormous percentage of medical outcomes are based on social determinants. And this approach is going to be partly clinic-based, where you'll see social services and medical services combined, not unlike what we have here with community hubs, but then also creates a care model in which caregivers, specially trained in both social and health issues, go into homes or wherever the actual patients are, and then overlays on top of that a system of managing the data among them, perhaps combining telehealth. So we're going to actually begin rolling that out for the first clinic in New York early next year. We actually think, and we're excited to have conversations with the government officials, with the United Way and others, that parts at least of that approach could be piloted here. So it's not just about urban planning. It's not just about infrastructure or mobility. We think some of these opportunities exist in the social services and community services as well. So those are 3 possible examples that we have talked about, and we look forward to exploring kind of what priorities might be as we move forward. Thank you very much.
And I live in the distillery. Super excited to have you guys in the neighborhood, and looking forward to seeing what you can do. It's come up a few times about affordability, and I'm sorry I haven't gone through the 198 pages. It's on my list. You have checked a lot of boxes for me. I'm feeling pretty good about things, but one of my concerns is once you're done the planning and the development begins, you're going to hand things over to developers who have different priorities and different visions. And I'm worried about poor quality, I'm worried about ghettoization. Can you speak to what you've done in the past and what you might be able to do here?
So this is where Waterfront Toronto is the public steward of the affordability of the climate change and the work that we've already done and will continue to do, like in the West Don Lands or in other areas where creating the 20% permanently affordable. Let's do a higher amount if we can. We control the land, or we were working with the city in terms of the future of the Portlands, if it gets to that point, where we will be negotiating as a master developer, representing the city and working together to make sure that those goals that are part of whatever plan that the city council endorses and that others in the community endorse actually get executed, because that is our role. That is why we were created, and that continues on beyond, and make sure that the developers are doing what the plan says it should be done. Thank you. You're welcome.
Okay, I think we're going to have to wrap our Q&A there. I do want to remind you that we have a number of opportunities for you to chat with experts on the staff teams on both Waterfront Toronto and the Sidewalk Labs side, outside in the activations around the pillars, and you can do that directly after this closes. And I really want to thank everybody who came up to the mic to ask questions. Those were extraordinarily well-positioned questions that added a lot of dimension, and I hope that we continue to do this. Thank you so much, Dan and Will, for your time. I think we'll give them a round of applause.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I just want to ask to close out, what are the ways that people can engage after this event closes?
Right.
How can they get in touch?
If you go online to Sidewalk Toronto, www.sidewalktoronto.ca, there's a web page there. It's co-created. There's opportunities to check off a bunch of things, to get on the list, to be updated, to offer thoughts and ideas, partnership opportunities. So we think that's probably the best way. If you're not someone who likes using the internet, there are other ways to, we're at 20 Bay Street, so you can address it to Waterfront Toronto, and we'll make sure it gets to the right person. But we will be coming back here in the next 10, 12 days with the next set of places and ways to get together, to exchange ideas, forums, panels. We'll figure that part out, but you will be aware of it, and we look forward to that continued conversation.
That's awesome. So, so make sure you go to Sidewalk Labs, Sidewalk Toronto's website, and you can stay engaged. They're going to do their best to answer all the questions that are coming forward from this public process, and this is the first step. So there will be many more opportunities to engage as we go through. Thank you so much for joining us today, and hope to see you out in the lobby.
And thank you, Denise,
so
much.
Thank you, and thank you all so much.
Thank you. Good job.
Great job.